You've probably heard the name The Odyssey thrown around in your school, or maybe even looking forward to the upcoming Christopher Nolan adaptation and thought, wait, what even is this story? The craziest part though is if you plotted Odysseus' actual route on a modern map, the journey from Troy back to Ithaca should take about 2 weeks. Instead, it takes a decade. Not because he's lost in a simple navigation sense, but because of divine interference, human arrogance, and a constant battle between intelligence and impulse. So in this video, I'm breaking down the full story of the Odyssey, from the collapse of Odysseus' household in Ithaca, to Telemachus' search for his father, to the insane monster-filled voyage across the ancient Mediterranean, and finally the brutal return and reckoning that ends it all. And by the end, you're going to understand not just what happens, but why this story has survived nearly 3,000 years of retellings, including the massive cinematic version we're about to see on the big screen. Let's get into it. Before Odysseus starts getting thrown across the ocean by angry gods, we first need to understand how the Odyssey works. This epic comes from ancient Greece and was shaped over centuries through oral storytelling. Basically, traveling poets called rhapsodes would perform it from memory using repeated phrases, rhythms, and formulaic storytelling patterns. It wasn't originally a book, it was a performance. That's why the story feels weirdly non-linear. It jumps, it repeats, it zooms out and back in. And structurally, it's very different from something like the Iliad. Where the Iliad is about rage, war glory, and battlefield heroics, the Odyssey is about survival, intelligence, and getting back to normal life without losing your mind. One is about winning glory and war, and the other is about making it home alive afterward. And that distinction matters more than anything else in the story. We start not with Odysseus, but with his son, Telemachus. And things in Ithaca are not okay. Odysseus has been gone for 20 years. 10 years fighting in Troy, and another 10 just trying to get home. Everyone assumes he's dead, so what happens to his kingdom? It collapses. Over 100 suitors have moved into his palace, eating his food, draining his wealth, and aggressively trying to marry his wife, Penelope. They're not just annoying, they're effectively trying to steal his entire legacy while he's gone. And Penelope, she's holding them off with pure psychological warfare. She agrees to choose a new husband after she finishes weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus' father, but every night she secretly unweaves what she did during the day, so the cycle never ends. Meanwhile, Telemachus is stuck in the middle of this chaos. He's grown up without a father, surrounded by disrespect, and completely unsure how to assert authority. So the goddess Athena steps in. She tells him, essentially, you need to go find out what happened to your father. And that becomes the first movement of the story. Telemachus traveling across Greece, meeting old war companions like Nestor and Menelaus, gathering fragments of truth. And what he learns is this: Odysseus is alive, but trapped on an island with the goddess named Calypso. That sets everything else in motion. Now we finally meet Odysseus. He's on the island of Ogygia, held by the nymph Calypso. And here's the important detail. He's not being tortured, he's being offered paradise, immortality, comfort, safety, no war, no suffering, no death. And he hates it, because Odysseus doesn't want eternal comfort. He wants his life back, his identity, his wife, his home. So when Zeus finally orders Calypso to release him, Odysseus builds a raft and sails out into the ocean alone. And that's when the gods remind him who's in charge. Poseidon, god of the sea, absolutely obliterates his raft with a storm. Odysseus survives only barely, drifting for days, until he washes up on the land of Scheria, the Phaeacians. And this is where the story shifts tone, because instead of monsters, we get civilization. Princess Nausicaa finds him naked and exhausted, and for the first time in years, Odysseus is treated with basic human dignity. He's brought to the palace, fed, and hosted in a way that contrasts sharply with everything he's experienced since Troy. And when they ask who he is, he finally starts telling his story. This is the core of the epic. Odysseus recounts everything that happened after Troy. Right after Troy, his men raid Isthmus and refuse Odysseus' orders to retreat. They stay at a party on the beach, get hit by a massive counterattack, and suffer heavy losses. Next, they hit the island of the Lotus Eaters, where the crew eats a honeyed plant that erases their memories and ambition, forcing Odysseus to drag them back to the ships screaming. Things go completely off the rails against the Cyclops Polyphemus, a giant son of Poseidon. Trapped in his cave, Odysseus watches the monster eat his men alive. Playing the long game, Odysseus tells the giant his name is Nobody, gets him dead drunk, and drives a sharpened wooden stake into his single eye. When Polyphemus screams to his brothers, "Nobody is killing me," the other giants walk away, allowing the Greeks to escape by clinging to the bellies of the giant's sheep. Safely back on his ship, Odysseus makes the most catastrophic mistake of his life. Fueled by pride, he yells his real name back to the shore. Polyphemus immediately prays to Poseidon, cursing Odysseus to lose all his men and return to a house of total chaos. The universe becomes rigged against them. Aeolus, the wind god, gifts them a bag containing all the stormy winds. They sail so close to Ithaca they can see the shore fires, but while Odysseus sleeps, his suspicious crew opens the bag looking for gold, blasting them back across the sea. They then encounter the Lystragonians, giant cannibals who pelt the fleet with boulders, sinking 11 of his 12 ships. With one ship left, they land on the island of Circe, a witch goddess who turns a scouting party into pigs. Armed with a divine herb from Hermes, Odysseus resists her magic and forces her to restore his men. Circe becomes an ally, but delivers a chilling directive. To get home, Odysseus must sail to the underworld. In the realm of the dead, Odysseus speaks with fallen Trojan heroes, his own mother, and the prophet Tiresias, who warns him to never touch the sacred cattle of the sun god. Returning to the living, the gauntlet tightens. He survives the sirens' mind-warping songs by having his crew plug their ears with beeswax while tying him to the mast. He then navigates the narrow strait of Scylla and Charybdis, making the brutal choice to steer close to the six-headed Scylla, sacrificing 6 men to save the rest from the lethal whirlpool. Finally, stranded and starving on the island of the sun god, the crew ignores all warnings and slaughters the sacred cattle while Odysseus sleeps. Zeus delivers instant retribution, hitting the ship with lightning. The boat splinters and the remaining crew drowns. Only Odysseus survives, clinging to wreckage until he washes up on Ogygia, bringing the story full circle. Moved by his tale, the Phaeacians sail Odysseus home to Ithaca while he sleeps, leaving him on the beach with a hoard of treasure. The epic now transforms from a fantasy adventure into a tense psychological thriller. The palace is crawling with over 100 armed suitors. Knowing a direct approach means death, Athena disguises Odysseus as a filthy, broken old beggar. In this form, he tests the loyalty of his people, reuniting with his loyal swineherd Eumaeus and his son Telemachus. Together, father and son plot a surgical strike. Telemachus will lock away the palace weapons, trap the suitors inside, and leave no survivors. The next day, Odysseus enters his own home. The suitors mock him and throw a footstool at his head, while Odysseus stores up the abuse, even meeting a guarded Penelope who fails to recognize him. Sensing the tension, Penelope announces a final challenge. She produces Odysseus's old hunting bow, a weapon only he is strong enough to flex, and promises to marry whoever can string it and shoot an arrow cleanly through 12 aligned axe heads. The suitors strain, sweat, and fail completely. Then the ragged beggar asks for a turn. Ignoring the suitor's laughter, Odysseus takes the bow, strings it with the effortless grace of a musician tuning a harp, and fires the arrow cleanly through all 12 axes. The rags drop from his shoulders, the room freezes, and the suitors realize the trap has sprung. The execution begins instantly. Odysseus drives an arrow straight through the throat of the lead suitor Antinous. The remaining men scrabble for weapons, finding only bare walls and locked doors. Odysseus, Telemachus, and 2 loyal servants systematically purge the palace until the floor runs deep with blood. With the suitors dead, Odysseus faces his hardest battle, convincing Penelope. Traumatized by years of imposters, she tests him by ordering a servant to move their bridal bed. Odysseus flares up in anger, noting that it's impossible because he built the bed with his own hands around the stump of a living olive tree that anchors the house. Recognizing their private secret, Penelope finally embraces her husband. The next morning, an armed mob of the suitors' vengeful families marches on the estate, threatening a devastating civil war. Just as the two sides clash, Athena descends from Olympus on Zeus's orders. She commands both sides to drop their weapons and wipes the hatred from the townspeople's hearts. A divine enforced truce breaks the cycle of blood, and the king is finally back on his throne. At face value, the Odyssey is a monster story, a tragic tale, a travel epic, a mythological adventure. But underneath that, it's something much more uncomfortable. It's about what happens after war ends. Odysseus doesn't come home as the same man who left. He comes back shaped by trauma, survival, and constant moral compromise. And the biggest question the story asks isn't, will he get home? It's, what does it cost to actually get there? And what do you become along the way? That's why it still matters. And that's why when Nolan brings this world back to the big screen, it's not just a mythological retelling. It's a story about identity, survival, and the long shadow of violence, still echoing thousands of years later. And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, check out the video on your screen, and I'll see you in the next one.